It was a rough summer in Vermont, where Livia and I battled a bat infestation in our studio apartment. That was when my fascination with bats was piqued. It was a rather traumatic series of events, trying to fall asleep each night amidst the scritchy, scratchy sound of bats crawling up the eaves just above our heads, knowing that what was coming each night they would drop down from a teeny quarter-sized hole in the rafter, and we would wake up to an erratic flying furry spot dive bombing our heads as we shuffled under a sheet to the stairwell, trying to make it out to the car at 2 a.m. and make a plan. It turns out that bats are precious and important members of ecosystems. Simply destroying the colony wasn't exactly in keeping with UU principles or with the advice of local wildlife experts. So, while said experts rigged up a system to help them stay out of our home and slowly encourage them to settle elsewhere, I got a little curious. I got a little curious about this animal, this weird little being that had inspired such intense and fervent fear in me and my body. What I came to know and understand about bats made me love them, mostly for the ways in which they are singular, the only flying mammal. The only mammal which shares food amongst colonies of non-blood relations. They care for one another despite a lack of genetic overlap, which feels distinctly queer to me. Bats have chosen family. Bats can live to be up to 40 years old. They eat mosquitoes that carry disease. They come at night and are harbingers of the setting sun and the day's end. They are unfairly lumped in with the spooky and the scary, so it felt like the Sunday before Halloween was the right time to preach about these unusual creatures which had captured my heart. But mostly what I love about bats is how they move through the world. It feels like a truth universally acknowledged that bats use echolocation to fly in the pitch black. Despite having very little eyesight, bats move with ease around trees and homes and other various obstacles, seeking out and hunting down their dinners each night. They emit high-pitched frequencies from their mouths and their nose, and depending on how that frequency, how that sound wave comes back to them, it tells them what the landscape around them consists of. How dense is that stand of pine trees over there? How close is that pitched roof? And with the noises that they make from their mouths, which are far too high-pitched for us to hear, the shape of the world around them emerges from the dark of night as they fly, these winged mammals searching for a meal they'll share with a friend. Bats embody the impossible in a world that is determined to place limits on what can happen in the dark, a world that tells us to be afraid of that which we cannot see, a world which insists that blindness is limiting and debilitating. Bats show us otherwise. They leap from ledges into the night, they swoop and they glide and they dive between branches and telephone wires with ease. The world in which they inhabit, the rules that they break, that we hold tightly to, should inspire us each to question seriously that which we think is impossible. We think it is impossible to see without our eyes. I called this sermon The Sound of Shapes because that's what makes bats so adept at traveling through the dark. It's not the look of shapes that makes the landscape intelligible, it's the sound of it. But bats are singular, right? I said so myself mere minutes before. Impossible for the evolutionary tactic of one winged mammal to translate to the bipedal strategies of man, right? No. Because bats are worthy of emulation and their highly specific navigational skills are not so singular, humans, turns out, can echolocate too. Take, for instance, Daniel Kish, the 55-year-old Californian who lost his sight to cancer at 13 months old, who taught himself to see using echolocation. He hikes, he rides a bike, and he teaches others with low vision to create a landscape that is navigable using their mouths, to create a series of clicks which reverberate back to him. MRI studies have shown that brain structures that process visual information in sighted people process echolocation in blind echolocation experts. The same region of the brain. So the brain doesn't need eyesight to be able to see. It's not so impossible for blind people to experience the world with the same sense of purpose and adventure as a bat which wings through the night sky. I found this breathtaking. The explosion in my mind as a sighted person of the connection between eyes and sight. What is seeing then, if not with our eyes? Break that rule, and what else might follow? According to Daniel in the podcast that I listened to entitled Batman, the amazing thing isn't the fact that he has taught himself echolocation, it's the low expectations we have of blind people to make sense of their own world. The podcast goes on to explain that there's a kind of reciprocal relationship between the expectations we have and the way others fulfill those expectations quite spectacularly. As a society, we expect blind people to be quite limited in their abilities, and in turn, sighted people create a world that limits the abilities of blind people. There's even an entire book devoted to this notion of the social construction of blindness. If we never expect blind people to navigate a city independently, why would we ever insist on small and crucial points of architecture that would make it easier, such as changing the sidewalk material when you get closer to a crosswalk, bus stops that read aloud a timetable, city lights that are always replaced as soon as they go out? My own understanding of our pitted sidewalks and dangerous curbs was only really magnified for me when I started pushing a stroller. This short but intense insight I had as a new mom when I had to dart into the street, when the sidewalk was crumbling and the curb cut gave way to potholes. If eyes are not needed for sight, and disability is a construction of our own making, break these rules, and what else might follow? See, I look to nature to tell me that which I think is impossible might just be exactly what we need. Bees that are too heavy to take flight. Horses that are too precarious to run on such spindly legs. Bats that should not be able to dance in the dark. The natural world is full of insistent examples that rules that we think are immutable, laws that we think of as untouchable, truth that we think of as unyielding, are all able to be exploded in possibility for a totally new and different way. Every day we are confronted with a world that tells us that the things we hope for, the things we long for, are impossible. World peace, children with full bellies and warm beds each night, a society that treats all with dignity and respect. It's impossible, they say, unrealistic, not practical, it will take too long, impossible. But it's the words of Audre Lorde that echolocate back to me now. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Just as blind folks can see, just not with the tools I use, not with the eyes I use, we will never create a new world. We will never build a heaven here and now using the same old tactics we have always relied on. Monetary policy, the legislative process, high-rises and skyscrapers. We need new tools that come from a place of instinct, from conscience and moral heart, rather than social conditioning, where we insist on our own expectations to fulfill rather than the ones that we are force-fed in a world overrun by greed and corruption. James Baldwin wrote in The Fire Next Time, "I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but in today's day and age, the impossible is the least we can demand from each other." And one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history, and American Negro history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible, he says, and in a service that is battling against tropes of dark as evil and scary, this quotation feels all the more important. The impossible is the least we can demand from each other. It is the least we can demand from each other. I am not afraid to be called idealistic. I am not afraid to be called a dreamer, a pie-in-the-sky wishful thinker. I am not afraid because I know it could be the same way that bats fly at night, the same way that the universe unfolded to bring us here on this floating marble in space. I am not afraid because Unitarian Universalism emboldens me to believe that what nature makes possible, we too can make possible. What rules have been broken by bats can be broken by humans, that the construction of our life as narrow and for the few is the wrong life, that we want expansive, generative worlds, flourishing worlds into which our children breathe clean air. Their blindness and their deafness or their palsy or their tremor is not an indication of a shortcoming, but rather an invitation to break more rules. A testament to the miracle of bats. Our expectations are our chains. Our expectations are our prisons. We expect so little from one another, from our government, from ourselves, from this world, that it can feel bleak to live each day. But as Victoria Safford says, what song would you sing if you took the time to appreciate the miracles that are all around? If we learned that seeing meant so much more than using our eyeballs, that listening meant so much more than opening our ears, that inclusion meant so much more than a friendly face and an open pew. You might have noticed we've started using visual access cues here, short descriptions of our physical selves, so that those with low vision can know we take seriously their experience of this place. That we take seriously the potential to break the expectations we have for who is in this community, to break the expectations that marginalized people have for what religious community might mean. The impossible is the least we can demand from each other. And so, when you set out at twilight to trick or treat with your kids, or to take up your post at the porch when the sun, that glaring, impossible, fiery ball of orange which orients our days, when it begins to fall and bats emerge from the eaves. Think of the world we could make. Think of the world which defies expectation, which feeds the hungry and empowers the oppressed, which paves the curb cuts and offers Braille and ASL alongside Spanish and Mandarin. Think of the world as embodied by bats. May it be so, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.